First of all, I want to thank particularly you and the colleagues from Manifesto in general for inviting me to this meeting. And I am very happy that I'm chairing this meeting with so many distinguished and interesting talk and speech from the colleagues that have preceded me with their intervention. The subject of socialist democracy, which is, as we know, essential and for the most possible complete socialist society, and moreover, to what it is, according to my point of view, correct, the construction of a socialist society. So, socialist society is a period, is constructed, and at the same time is a transitional. All this has to bear upon what democracy for this society is. At the beginning, I wish to remember or underline that democracy, as part of a broad society, is an organic part of it, of this society, including, of course, its history and with wide, rich interrelationship among its various components. Regarding this point, it is necessary to keep in mind as a reference Marx's concept and theory of the economic social formation, this essential, absolutely key concept of Marx theory. Democracy, then, any kind of democracy, is to be understood and conceived as part or component of this economic social formation. That is the totality. The totality. On the other hand, we are also to keep in mind that the starting process of the construction of a socialist society, this new society inherits up to a certain point the existence of the liberal bourgeois democracy. This, of course, in the cases where historically the new stage of the new starting point, that is socialist society, emergence from a previous liberal democracy society, but not other forms like we know that exists. Even in these cases, let's say, for example, in Latin America, with such a history of dictatorship since the first independence during the second and third decade of the 19th century for most of the countries of the continent. So, very few countries like my own Cuba, which did not took part in the first period of the first independence war, but we are arrived to that almost many decades later. But at the very beginning, in the Latin American, I like to call this the first independence because we speak today of the need of a second independence. And for most of the countries, even with all this history of dictatorships since the beginning of the 19th century, right after the first independence started, we find references of processes with elements, at least in a formal manner, of liberal democracy. The subject of democracy implies also the state and the subject of the civil society, as well as, and this is also of the utmost importance, the relationship of the two. That is, the relationship between the state and civil society, which was key to Marx, as it was key, for example, to Gramsci, as we all know. The relationship between the question that Marx pointed out since the period of his youth, that is, since 1843, with the Jewish question, in the sense that the new society has to overcome the separation between state and civil societies, which occurred during the capitalist society period. That is, for the new society, socialism and future communism, both of them had to re-meet again, to come together again. And Marx understood that as an essential characteristic for the new society. This, for me, is very important if we have to develop a broad sense of democracy for socialism with all models and a variety of models, but there are essential points that has to be kept in mind. And this, for me, is one of them. Whatever model, the way in which them both are meeting again can change from country to country, from one experience to the other. But the idea that they have to come together again, it seems to me, has to be a key characteristic of the socialist society. The idea of this idea of coming, let's say, together of both of them was never abandoned by Marx. In the 18th Brumaire, he did mention organizations of the bourgeoisie as part of the civil society. So including organizations which we do not find so clearly in the period of youth. And then, as we also need to remember, this idea was stressed in Marx's text, Civil War in France, that is related to the Paris Commune. And there, if we remember a little bit, is one of the essential points for Marx, that the state do not, let's say, eat civil society, but civil society also needs a state. They have to come together. I like to say sometimes that what puts them together is that they have the same project for society, and the society as a whole construct the new project. Creating a lot has to be very creative, but on realistic basis. Realistic here, I mean adequate understanding what society and history are. So I wish to underline the idea of the intimate relationship between the idea of democracy in the new society and Marx's thesis of the need of meeting a state and civil society. Marx and Engels never tried to imagine or conceived in an ideal or abstract way how this new socialist society would be. They almost say nothing about it. There are some essential key issues, but they say almost nothing about it. And that we have to understand, because we have to learn from that too. They didn't know. So no abstraction, no creative invention without adequate support from reality. And reality meant economics, politics, traditions, everything, the totality. So this is essential. They didn't go into that because they just didn't know. And they, in their letter particularly, you can see that they say, well, as history goes and society changes, that we will know. I mean, the proletariat and the oppressed people will know what to do when the moment comes. From how this new society would be, so no imagination in that sense. From the important events taking place in Europe during the time they arrived, during the time they were analyzing society, they arrived to the conception, interpretation, theory, which and enrich the general view. Allow now me to remind that that first it was of the need to take or seize the political power. They then learned that this was not enough. I remind you of that. It's not enough, and that the machine or the machinery of the state, of the bourgeois state, had to be destroyed. But then stayed the question about what is going to replace the old machine that had been destroyed. And then the problem is they didn't know. And they acknowledge it. And we learn from that. Acknowledge we do not know. Again, they stay open, these questions stay open for many years. And then again, they did not invent outside reality of society or of history. This is new machine, how this new machine, let's say machine, it's a metaphor, of course, would be. Marx and Engels considered the French Commune, as you remember, as the new form. And I want to underline now the word that Marx uses, finally discovered. So this finally, so transmits to us this endeavor, this thinking, but always restraining themselves or going beyond what they could do. So finally, they found something. And this expression tells us about a method also. They did not know what form would this new state would take, and therefore what form this new democracy would be, what kind, what form, what way, what to keep from the old liberal experience of liberal bourgeois democracy, because that existed. It's not something that is just going to be thrown like that. No, there are things to learn from this experience of humankind.
If you could wrap up soon, Isabel.
Excuse me?
If you could wrap up soon.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yes. You know, no, but just, yeah.
Yes. So this has to fit into this totality and establish links and being coherent with the rest of society, taking also into consideration social classes and the question of power. I now this question of time. I want to then maybe skip some. I wanted to say. Then I would not read. I will just. I want to underline the idea that socialist democracy is a new type of democracy. It's not another kind of democracy, but a new type. But a new type that is essentially different from any other kind of society, of democracy that could exist. It's a new type from bourgeois democracy. It's not a new democracy, but a new type of democracy. Now, this new type of democracy implies then the variety of model, but always in the line that is within that this kind of democracy has to be a different type, including the overcoming of inequality, the participation of the people or of all citizens, not only electing and then forgetting, but doing, like, for example, we do in Cuba for the new constitution. It's not that we voted the constitution also, it's that the text of the constitution was discussed by everybody in the island. Well, of course, children did not participate. And the opinion of the people were taken into consideration. The text of the constitution was changed according to our proposals, and a final revision was proposed to the people for the votation. So then is then that the election and the form of the using voting is comes into the situation. And finally, because this has been a real problem today in Latin America, imperialism. United States imperialism, the most terrible imperialism that mankind had known, is really doing everything they can to avoid that the new democracies of Latin America can really blossom, develop, go ahead. Even the FMI, the imperialists have invented the form that when the new links or progressive government comes into government, they can do very little because the FMI and other forms has created such a force that it do not let the new governments go ahead with their changes. And that is the real danger for all kind of democracy, socialist or liberal democracy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Thank you for underlining the dangers of this Biden summit of so-called summit of democracies. And also, I feel that your remarks